Susannah Crane had one winter before they sold the farm out from under her, and a market garden county, where a hard freeze killed the unprepared as surely as it killed the seedlings. For 12 years, the Cranes had grown the earliest produce in the county on the rich bottom ground at Fennmore. Her husband Daniel, a market gardener from a long line of them, had built the heart of the operation with his own hands. A greenhouse, 16 feet by 32, glass-roofed and brick-walled, kept warm all winter by a system of interior beds no one else in Fennmore had ever tried at that scale. It let the Cranes sell greens in January, while every other grower waited on the spring. Daniel died of a stroke in October of 1883. He was 61. His two sons came from Ohio to settle the estate and told Susannah, politely and with the finality of a decided thing, that the farm would be sold in the spring and the proceeds divided under a will that had never imagined her outliving him. No claim of her own, no children who would keep her, no home past the thaw. The older son, Warren, was not a bad man. He told her she could stay in the house through the winter, generous by the standard of the time. He never thought to say a single word about the greenhouse. So Susannah moved into it. The town heard that Daniel Crane's widow had gone to live in a glass house in the dead of winter and decided the grief had unmoored her. No one came to help. By the time the deep cold settled over Fennmore, the neighbors whose stoves were losing the fight would find their way to the one warm, green, impossible room in the county, and to the widow who had made a garden keep her alive. This was not, she would later explain, a dramatic decision. It was a practical one. The greenhouse was warm. The house was not warm, or rather, it was warm when the stove was burning and cold when it wasn't, in the typical pattern of frame houses in Indiana winters. The greenhouse, by contrast, maintained a steady temperature between 50 and 65 degrees in all but the very coldest conditions, because 16 hotbeds burning simultaneously generate more heat than a modest wood stove, and the glass roof traps solar gain even in January, and the Dutch brick walls on three sides retain whatever heat accumulates through the day and release it slowly through the night. Daniel had always maintained that a person could live in the greenhouse if they had to, and he had built it to a standard that made this true. Proper ventilation through hinge-top sashes, a water supply from a cistern that was set below frost depth, a good brick floor that stayed warm from the hotbed heat below. There was a small potting bench where the south door opened, and Susannah moved a cot behind the bench and hung a canvas curtain for privacy, and set her lamp on the potting shelf. She told Warren, when he came by to check on matters in November, that she was staying in the greenhouse for the winter to keep the hotbeds running, since if the beds went cold, the glass would crack in hard frost. This was true. Warren, who had not considered the greenhouse maintenance problem, said that was a sensible arrangement and he appreciated it. She did not mention the cot. The greenhouse, once Susannah had it to herself, revealed its full character. She had always worked in it, but Daniel had managed its system, the scheduling of the manure recharge, the timing of the vent sashes, the seeding calendar, the harvest rotation. Now she learned it as an operator rather than an assistant, and she found that she understood it more deeply than she had expected, because Daniel had talked about its workings constantly, and she had absorbed the logic without knowing she was doing so. The hotbeds, she found, needed to be recharged every 3 weeks in the deepest cold. The fermentation ran out of energy faster in hard weather. She developed a system of staggering the recharges so that some beds were always at peak heat while others were mid-cycle. She learned exactly which vents to open when the solar gain was strong. The greenhouse could reach 90 degrees on a clear January afternoon if the vents were not managed, and exactly which to close when clouds came. She grew lettuces and spinach and parsley and chives. She started seedlings in the hottest of the interior beds and moved them to the cooler perimeter beds as they hardened. In January, she had fresh greens. In February, she had them when the outdoor temperature was 15 below zero, and the other market gardeners in Fennmore had nothing. She sold into the market every Thursday at prices she set herself, which were lower than she could have asked, because she did not want to be seen as exploiting scarcity. She wanted to be seen as reliable. There was a difference, and it mattered to her. The cold that came in the second week of February 1884 was, as the Fennmore newspaper reported afterward, the most severe sustained cold event since 1872. The temperature fell to 29 below zero Fahrenheit and stayed in the range of 20 to 25 below for 5 consecutive days. At this temperature, outdoor cold frames, the standard hotbed boxes with glass sashes that every other Fennmore gardener used, could not maintain adequate soil temperature even with fresh manure. The soil froze from the sides. The glass cracked in 3 cases from the thermal stress. The seedlings in those frames died. The indoor kitchen gardens, window boxes, small arrangements of pots near stoves, survived in many houses, but produced nothing like the volume of an outdoor cold frame. Every kitchen gardener in Fennmore lost their February seedlings. Susannah's greenhouse did not lose a plant. The hotbeds, protected by the brick walls and the glass roof, and the insulating effect of the greenhouse itself, maintained their temperature through the cold snap within 2 degrees of their normal operating range. Susannah added a canvas insulating curtain on the north interior wall and closed the vent sashes for the full 5 days and added fresh manure to the 2 beds that were coming to end of cycle. The greenhouse interior held between 47 and 55 degrees through the entire event. The seedlings in the hottest beds did not know there was a cold snap. On the 4th day of the cold spell, a woman named Mina, whose cold frames had all frozen, came to the Crane greenhouse to ask if Susannah had any seedlings to sell. She had a March delivery commitment to the Fennmore General Store that she was now unable to fulfill. Susannah had seedlings. She sold Mina what she needed at a fair price. Over the next 2 days, 3 more market gardeners came with similar requests. Susannah sold what she could spare. She kept detailed records of what she sold, to whom, and at what price. She kept the records partly for accuracy, and partly because she had a feeling, not quite a plan, but the shape of a plan, about what the spring might look like. Warren Crane arrived in Fennmore in March to begin the sale process. He found the greenhouse in full production, the hotbeds recharged and thriving, the seedling inventory healthy, and an order book with 11 pending commitments from local gardeners and the general store for spring seedlings and early produce, all with deposits paid. He looked at the order book for a long time. Then he asked Susannah what she thought the greenhouse operation was worth, separately from the land and the house. She told him. She had thought about this carefully. She had written the number down in her accounts journal before he arrived, so that she would not be tempted to change it when she saw his face. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that the number seemed reasonable, and that he would discuss it with his brother. The negotiation took 6 weeks. The result was that Susannah Crane purchased the greenhouse from the estate for a price that used the full amount of her inheritance share and a note for the remainder, to be paid from operating revenue over 3 years. It was a transaction that required her to take a risk that she did not have to take. She could have taken the cash from her share and found a house somewhere. But she had spent the winter in the greenhouse, in the warmth of 16 beds of fermenting manure, surrounded by living plants in a season that had frozen everything else for 20 miles. And she had understood something that Daniel had always known and had tried to explain to her. The greenhouse did not require the farm. The greenhouse was the farm, the soil, the beds, the glass, the heat below. That was the whole operation. Everything else was peripheral. She ran the Crane greenhouse. She kept the name, though Warren had offered to let her change it, for 19 more years. She expanded it twice. She hired 2 assistants by the 5th year. The Fennmore market came to rely on her February and March seedlings in the way that a kitchen relies on salt, steadily, entirely, without thinking about it. In the hard winter of 1888, she sheltered not just seedlings, but 2 families whose houses had failed entirely. She had added a small wood stove by then for supplemental heat and a proper sleeping area behind the potting bench. The family stayed for 4 days. The hotbeds did not notice. If this story made you think of someone who kept things growing when the rest of the world froze over, leave their name in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more frontier survival stories, the women history overlooked, and what they were quietly building, subscribe. New stories every week.